Good evening, everyone. It's lovely to see so many people who have joined us for this evening. Could I please ask our student volunteers to unmute and put your cameras on just for the start of this session? Hi guys, thanks very much, lovely to see you. Okay, so I'm just going to start off by introducing myself. My name's Claire Holliss and I am the Head of History at the college. And with us today, we've got two of our lovely students, so Etienne and Amy. So they're currently in year 13 with us now, and they're doing both either side of the history course for us. So hopefully they'll be able to sort of give you the students' perspective on what it is like at the college to study the subject here. So just to start off, just to give you a rundown of who's who in the department. So as I said, I'm the head of department. We also have Sandra, Jack, Kate, and occasionally we're joined by Matthew, who also works as a politics teacher. And together we are the history department, and we teach across both sides of the course, the modern and the early modern units there. So what we're going to do for this evening, the aims of this kind of session is to give you guys a bit of an insight into the topics that we cover in A-level history, and to also give you an idea about what topics we cover in each side of the courses. So you'll probably be aware that we offer a modern and an early modern option here. So this will hopefully give you an idea about what choice you might want to make when it comes to deciding between the two units or two courses. Obviously, normally I'd be able to introduce you to staff in the history department in person. Unfortunately, that's going to be less possible because of the current circumstances, but at least you'll get a chance to meet me and to meet a couple of our students in the department as well. For you to think about where history might take you in terms of your progression, if you do choose to study it at the college, and finally, and probably most crucially, to answer any questions that you might have about the course. And just to kind of give you some extra information on that, there is a Q&A option there. So what we'd like to do, there will be a Q&A session held at the end of my presentation and the kind of model lesson we're going to show you. And so please do just type in any questions that come to you over the course of this presentation, and then we will get a chance to address them at the end of the session here as well. So yeah, just please type those in and we'll pick them up later on. Okay, so in terms of the format, I'm going to start off by giving you an overview of the key details about the course or the courses we offer here. We're going to just do a little mini lesson with our two students, and in that lesson, please, you may want to refer to the sources that were sent out to you alongside the letter advertising the applicant evening and giving you the information about it, as we'll be using those throughout that lesson there. And then finally, at the end, it will be time for our Q&A. So let's get going. So, as I said, there are two courses that we offer in history. Now, these are run by the same exam board. They're both AQA. They're both assessed in exactly the same way. So when you're deciding between them, the key thing that you need to consult is your feelings, your interests. Which of those sound most appealing to you? So in order to give you a bit of a chance to think about that choice, I'm going to give you a bit of a rundown of what is offered in each of the courses here. So the first option we offer is called that we title it the Struggle for Supremacy and Equality, and that's our early modern option there. And that covers the Tudors, the French Revolution, and then for the coursework, you'll look at the civil rights in the USA. The second option is one that's linked to themes of authority, ideology, and conflict, and that is the modern course there. And in that course, you would cover the British Empire, the Cold War, and then for your coursework, religion and rebellion in Tudor England. So just to go into a bit more depth about the early modern course first. So the first component is the Tudors between 1485 and 1603, and that's what we call the breadth study. So when we say breadth study, that means we're talking about a long period of time here. So in this case, we're covering just over 100 years of history. Now, some of you may have already studied the Tudors, so some of you might have done the Elizabeth option at GCSE, or you may have covered the Tudors at Key Stage 3 before you started your GCSE courses. This will go into some of those kind of themes in a lot more depth, and will give you an overview of the whole period there. And this side of the course is assessed by a question, some essay questions, but also a question on historical interpretations. So you'll have a chance to engage with what historians have said about the Tudors and to see whether, based on your knowledge, you agree with their interpretations on various key questions about the Tudor era and the Tudor dynasty. The next part of the early modern course is the France and Revolution one. Now, this might be less familiar to you. You may know a bit about it, or it's possible some of you may have covered it before, but it's much less likely you will have covered this part of history in your previous courses. Now, so this is the depth study. And what that means is it's a shorter period of time, and you go into the details, the events of that particular period in a lot more depth and a lot more detail. And in this course, you will have, again, some essay questions that you'll be assessed by, but also a question based around primary sources. So that might be a little bit more familiar to you. If you're doing history GCSE, you probably will be working with sources right now. So it's kind of looking at using some of the same techniques and same sort of tactics, but just in a little bit more depth and detail. And that French Revolution course is going to be the subject of our model lesson, which we're going to do later on. So you'll hopefully get a bit more of an idea about how we use sources and what kind of questions we ask in that course then. And then finally, you will have the coursework component. And this component covers the topic of the civil rights in the United States between 1865, so the end of the American Civil War and the abolition of slavery within the US, through to the 1980s or the mid sort of 20th century, and the where at the point where certain amount of civil rights have been gained by African Americans. And so this is a coursework unit where you'll be writing a extended essay on the topic of civil rights. You have a range of question options that you can choose from to look at there, and that accounts for 20% of your A level. So you can see here the majority of your A level will be examined papers, on 40% the breadth study, 40% the depth study, and then that final 20% will be assessed by your coursework. So the next topic, so yeah, just a bit more information here. So in terms of the kind of themes you'd be covering with the early modern course, you'll be focusing a lot on kind of power relations, so key individuals like Henry VIII, like Napoleon, like the key revolutionaries, how they have fought for, how they've used power, how they've sought to reform, and how they've struggled against resistance to that reform. You'll also be looking in more general themes of sort of social change and political change, fights for equality, fights for certain forms of religious freedom or religious change, struggles for kind of social or economic rights and privileges there as well. The second option that you will be potentially could choose is the modern option, and that is linked to the themes of authority, ideology, and conflict. So in that option, the first component 1, the breadth study, is on the British Empire. So obviously very topical at the moment. And that ranges from 1857 through to 1967 there. So you're talking about, again, just over 100 years of history, where you'll be looking at Britain, but also the experiences of various kind of colonized regions and countries during that period, looking at themes of the rise of empire, how it's sustained, how it declines there. And that is also your interpretations paper for the modern unit. So you'd be doing, again, like if you in the early modern case, you'll be engaging with historical interpretations there. The depth study in the modern unit is the Cold War. And again, this might be the one part of this course which is more familiar to you from your GCSE courses. And that, again, is a depth study looking at the rise and outbreak of the Cold War in 1945 through to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Again, this is the depth study. You're going into a bit more detail and you're looking at primary sources there. And then finally, the coursework unit you'll be looking at religion and rebellion in Tudor England there. So you'll be looking at various kind of struggles for political, religious, social change there. Now you might be thinking, well, hang on a second, you've kind of got the civil rights, the modern bit in the early modern course, and the early modern bit in the modern course here. That's because the exam board requires to give you a broad chronological range in both of our courses. So you get a chance to look at various different types of history there as well. And yeah, so just the themes here in terms of the kind of key interests in the modern course, you're looking at how international conflict, the powers that have shaped the world today, in many cases, looking at the Cold War and the British Empire, and you're also looking at ideologies, so things like communism, imperialism, capitalism, economic structures and things like that, and how they affect the world. So just to kind of reiterate about both those courses, they are exactly the same in their structure, exactly the same in terms of how they're assessed. The key thing, the key decision you guys need to make is, what are you interested in? Which of those two sounds more appealing to you? Okay, so other things to talk about. I know this is obviously something that is really interesting to people. Now, under normal circumstances, and fingers crossed we can perhaps return to this, the history department offers 2 residential trips. So for the early modern course, there's a trip to Paris, and that is linked to the French Revolution course. And for the modern course, there is a trip to Berlin, which is linked to the Cold War course. We also offer trips to places like Hampton Court, which is linked to the Tudors course, and to the National Archives. So for your coursework units, again, fingers crossed we'll be able to offer this, where you get to go to the National Archives and do a bit of your own research in preparation for your coursework. We have various visiting speakers and lecturers at the moment. It's kind of that when they are coming in, they're coming in via Zoom, but also normally we have them in person as well, and they will give you some more specified and expert insights into particular topics, but also to perhaps talk to you about various university destinations as well. So some photographs there of the last trip we were able to run to Paris and Berlin. Okay, so in terms of the details then about how the studying history works at Reigate, so you will have ordinarily 4 65-minute lessons a week. Now, in most cases, at least 2 of those will be put together as a double lesson there. So you'd have that there. You will be studying both the units simultaneously. So you will start at the beginning of year 12, if you'll say you're doing early modern with the Tudors and the French Revolution lessons. And so your 4 lessons will be divided into 2. So you'll have 2 Tudors lessons, 2 French Revolution lessons, 2 British Empire lessons, 2 Cold War lessons each per week. In terms of the methods we use, lots of contemporary sources, lots of group work and presentation, lots of debate as well. We really like to try and get you guys to engage with ideas and to challenge them. And hopefully we'll give you an idea about how that works in a moment in our kind of model lesson. So in terms of the sort of students that go on to thrive in history at Reigate, the key thing, the most important thing, is having a real abiding interest in the past, in history, because that is the thing that underpins everything else that you're going to need to do in order to be successful in the course. So being comfortable reading is also really important, and being comfortable with writing. That is the main way in which you're going to be assessed. That's a lot of the work you're going to be doing throughout the course involves those skills. Being eager to debate, wanting to engage in conversation about key ideas. Also being organised. That's a kind of a standard good student practice there, making sure that you're able to organise the various resources and booklets, etc., that we're going to be giving you throughout the course. So we are pretty lucky in terms of our students tend to be, I say lucky, it's down to their skill on a lot of levels. Our students tend to do really well. So you can see the most recent A-level results here. We are really delighted with the number of A star to B and A star to C grades there. And everyone in our last cohort did achieve the passing grade as well. So generally we feel that at Reigate, there's every chance of success if you join us, as long as you're obviously putting in the work and really engaging with the course. So just as a final sort of point, which may sort of be on your mind, most of you right now are thinking, perhaps, what are the best A-level courses for me? But as part of that calculation, you might be thinking, okay, well, what A-level courses are best for me in terms of what I want to do next? So history is really useful in this respect because it's what is often called a facilitating subject. It's not the sort of subject that will directly lead you into one fixed career, but it's a sort of subject that lots of different employers, lots of different universities value because of the skills and abilities it teaches you. So you'll be, as a history student, you'll be learning skills like being able to weigh up arguments, make a judgment on them, supporting your arguments with detailed evidence, communicating your arguments either verbally or in writing. Those are all things which you can use in a whole range of degree courses. And lots of students that join us go on to a whole different range of destinations there as well. So not just in, just flicking back, not just in humanities subjects, but also in sort of social sciences. Some students go on to do science subjects, depending on the other courses they're doing as well, because they're learning skills that are all valuable to them. So the key thing is really your level of interest, your kind of commitment to the subject. So what we're going to do now is we are going to just show you a little bit of the kinds of thinking and the kinds of sort of work that we do in a history lesson. So obviously, this isn't going to be exactly the same as an ordinary lesson. Hopefully, by the time you join us, we'll be able to be, most lessons will be in person, but also it's obviously having to be shortened down a little bit. But what this has been designed to give you a bit of an insight to show you the kinds of questions we look at in history in our ordinary lessons, but also the kinds of skills that we employ and that students deploy on a regular basis during their standard history lessons in an ordinary week. So let's get started. Right, so on the screen you can see in front of you the kind of question that you guys would be wrestling with as history students at the college. And this is quite a big question. It's a question that you'd be probably returning to. And that is, why was there a revolution in France in 1789? So if you were doing the French Revolution course, you'd be answering this question directly, but you'd be answering similar questions in all of the other courses as well. So, why did Henry VIII break with Rome? Why did the British Empire go into decline in the 20th century? Why did the relationship between the USSR and the USA break down after World War II? So this is an example of the kind of causal question that you'd be wrestling with as a history student. We're going to focus on particularly on the French Revolution here, and that side of the course. And that's going to be this topic, this question is going to guide the next part of the lesson that we're going to show you. So, as part of the materials that were sent home to you, you should have had a pack with lots of different sources on them. And hopefully you've had a chance to have a look at them and have a think about them and think about the kinds of sort of messages, the kinds of details, the kinds of ideas they're showing you. What I want to show you kind of now is the sort of way in which our students approach these sources. So all of our sources are approached with a question in mind. And in this case, the question is, why was there a revolution in France in 1789? So what I'm going to do in a second is I'm going to hand over to our students, Etienne and Amy, and I'm going to ask them to have a quick chat together about this source and the kinds of information they can find out about it, and what it's telling them about that question about why there was a revolution in France in 1789. Etienne, Amy, it's over to you.
Do you want me to start
You
off?
can start, Etienne, if you like, yes.
Okay. I guess probably the first thing, or maybe one of the more glaring things about the source, is if we look at the columns on the right-hand side, which show the increase in percentage of income with the bread priced at certain amounts. So we can see that in the space of maybe like half a year, it has gone up dramatically, particularly for those on lower daily wages. So if we're considering why there was a revolution, you can see that economic factors were clearly some kind of trigger in provoking a sense of violence if we're having that kind of exponential growth between percentage of incomes in that short a space of time.
Yeah, fabulous, brilliantly explained. Yeah, really good point there. I mean, just Amy, going back to you, like, you know, obviously you're a modern student, so this is perhaps less familiar ground to you. But looking just at our labourer in the Rebellion wallpaper works on his 15 sous a day wage, and then looking at what it happens. What if you were that labourer? What do you think your sort of concerns would be? What do you think your sort of attitudes would be by 1789?
I think I'd have quite a poor attitude spending 97% of my daily wage on bread effectively, because I think at this time, especially, we see it in England, we see it in all countries, as there's quite a glaring class divide between the very richest and the very poorest people. And the very poorest people are really, really struggling. So I think, especially with this source, you can see it in terms of the percentages as well. Actually, you can see kind of how much this affected people so much more in the lower classes, even though technically people in the upper classes were still paying just as much for their bread. You know, they were paying the same base price. Actually, with the percentages in this source, we can see how much more this really affected the kind of poorer classes.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, and it's interesting, isn't it? One of the things that I find interesting about this is sort of like, you know, there's obviously these are people who are all kind of working. There's obviously even the difference between them in terms of the percentages of their income they're spending. So if you're a journeyman locksmith, say for example, you know, 48% of your income on bread still seems pretty steep to me. I'm not sure I'd want to pay that much for my daily loaf of bread, but it is kind of like, you know, it's much less than that 97% of income on bread. Yeah, definitely. So Etienne, just to go back to you were sort of talking about kind of like this kind of the role that's going to play in causing a revolution. Just in general, like, you know, in terms of economic factors, how do they work in terms of causing this kind of political unrest in your experience?
I think particularly when you look at this source, we can see that if you're spending 97% of your income on bread, we can kind of imply that there's perhaps bad harvest, perhaps population increases, perhaps pockets of like urban areas of almost like mobs of people, of homeless people, which then comes into the sense of like mobilizing those people in a certain way for a revolution, because it essentially creates the circumstances in which you have people who can't buy food, who are all on the streets together in an overpopulated area, compared to what Amy was talking about, the class divide, compared to a whole group of people in completely opposing situations, which essentially creates a circumstance in which you can just mobilize those people for a revolution.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. You know, you'll get a situation where you've kind of got a real tinderbox, haven't you? All these kind of factors making people dissatisfied, and you just need the spark to set them off. Brilliant. Yeah. Amy, I'm just going to sort of talk to you. I mean, obviously, again, this is the French Revolution stuff, so this is not something that you're studying. Can you think of kind of equivalent sort of examples from the courses that you've studied where these kind of economic tensions are in play?
We saw this in Russia a lot actually as well, where they had a really kind of poor harvest in, I think, 1919, before kind of communism came about, and when people were really feeling poor done by. I think the bourgeoisie that you see in Russia kind of had this opulent wealth, and you know, they had a great culture, and there was quite an importance on, you know, arts and ballet, and that's how people really saw Russia as being incredibly wealthy. But there are also these kind of pockets and all of the, you know, rural places where people were really struggling, you know, to survive, and there was famine, and there was people, you know, kind of starving to death, and that was how it was kind of mobilized, where you get a 1% that have so much kind of inexplicable wealth, and then you have the rest of the population that can barely afford to, you know, eat or provide food for their families.
Right, yeah, absolutely brilliant. Yeah, that's really important, that sense of a real kind of divide. I think you can also see that, like, you know, that playing out sort of like, you know, that even linking to the Cold War course and things like that, Amy, where you're talking about like the real fear they have in 1945 that there's going to be general revolution because of the poor economic conditions. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Yeah, so some really, really good thoughts there, and I think what that sort of illustrates here is sort of like your ability to kind of zero in on those details here, looking not just at this table, but looking at kind of like the difference in percentage in August 1788 and to July 1789. thinking about what that means for a real person in France in those eras, what it actually means to pay 60% and then 97% of your income on just bread alone. And then, as both of you guys were doing, taking that fact, taking that idea, and thinking about it in terms of the consequences. How does that have a knock-on effect there? How does that then have a sort of, like, you know, an impact more widely on the experiences and on the broader political forces that are driving things onwards? Lovely. Excellent stuff. Thank you very much, both of you, for that excellent analysis. And we'll come back to you guys later with your other questions. Okay, so we've been focusing on the one of the key sources that you guys have been sent, and that's kind of focusing a lot on economics and economic causes of revolution. Now, obviously, that is not the only cause of revolution that is operating within France at the time, and one of the things one of the key skills that both Etienne and Amy have just shown us, one of the key things that they've done is they've done something called inference. Now, this might be a kind of a word that you've heard before. It might have been used in your your kind of history lessons, but it's the skill of taking the information from a source, identifying key different points, and then using that to kind of infer, to say, okay, well, if that's true, then that might have that knock-on effect, that might have that impact, that might work with that other thing that I know about to create a certain political effect. So you're looking at you're looking at evidence, and you're thinking about what that tells you and the consequences of the things that it is telling you for causing kind of political change or kind of economic unrest or lots of other different things. So you guys now have a chance to think about the sources that you have been sent. So on your sheets, you should have not just that table that we just looked at, but also some other key sources of bits of information about other key things that are happening in France in 1789. And what I'd like you to do, I'd like you to have a look at those sources and have a think about what other key causes you might be able to identify from the evidence you've been given. So Amy and Etienne have just talked about some of the economic problems. What other things might be going on? Now, I'm just going to give you a moment to think about that, and once you've had a chance to do that, I'm going to give you a chance to look at take part in a poll where you are thinking about the different causes of revolution. So we won't start that yet, but have a look at those sources now. Just going to give you a minute to have a look at them and think what other kind of key causes of revolution might there be. Okay, so hopefully you have the chance to have a look at those different causes. Now, we're going to come back to those kind of key things you've identified in a moment and think about them. But first up, we're also going to talk about another thing that we do in history with causes, because we don't just identify causes of revolution or of kind of a revolt or of things like Henry VIII's desire to break with Rome or things like the Korean War, etc. We then look at those causes and we make a judgment about them. So and often that judgment involves making a decision about the relative importance of causes. So you guys might have already done quite a bit of this in your previous work in history, if you're doing it at GCSE or at Key Stage, if you've done it at Key Stage 3. You're probably quite used to getting questions like, for example, was taking on the thing that Amy mentioned earlier, was the Russian Revolution caused by kind of economic grievances, or was it the Tsar Nicholas II's mistakes, etc., and making a decision about those different causes. And this is a skill that you continue looking at when you do history A level. Lots of the essay questions that we focus on are based around that question about the different importance of causes. Now, often you're having to juggle quite a few different causes in these circumstances, and often one of the things that you're doing which might be different to your GCSE courses is you're having to kind of decide what the causes are yourself. So you might be used to having GCSE questions where you're sort of given, okay, what is the major cause of the Russian Revolution? Bullet point 1, this cause. Bullet point 2, that cause. At A level, there will be moments where in almost all circumstances you'll be given a question about, you might be given one cause in the question. So was the primary cause of the Korean War the actions of Kim Il-sung? And then you will have to think about other alternative causes and make a decision between them. And one of the things you need to do then to think about these, making that judgment about causes, is the relationship between causes. So does one cause lead to all the others? So going back to our French Revolution example, is it the economic problems of France in 1789 which then kickstart some of the other key things which lead to revolution? So the mistakes that are made by Louis XVI, or sort of like, the radicalism of the kind of leaders of the Third Estate or the revolutionaries. You might also want to think about sort of like the longevity of different causes. Does one cause have a longer term effect? Has this cause been bubbling along for years and years and years and years, and is now kind of just erupting into sort of like an action? We also need to think about the type of, the number of people who are affected by a particular cause. So going back to our source, the price of bread, that is going to affect lots of people. Most people in 18th century France eat bread, and those of you who've covered the course will know they're pretty obsessed with bread. It is the cause of lots of riots. So most people are engaging with it, but as Etienne and Amy observed when they were looking at the source, whether the bread price affects you depends a lot upon your income and how much spending power you've got. And then finally, thinking about the sort of like, again, the long term, short term, does one cause seem to be the immediate trigger for change? Is it the case, do you think, that all these causes could have kind of gone merrily along without having much of an impact for a long time, but it just takes this extra cause to come in and be the straw that breaks the camel's back and just kick everything off into revolution or rebellion or kind of a major political change, warfare, etc. You name it, any possible kind of changes is in there. So that is just my kind of way of setting up what I'm going to ask you guys to be doing now. So you've had the chance to kind of think about the different kinds of causes that might be driving revolution in France in 1789. So you guys have had a bit of a discussion of the economic cause. You've got some sources which might have helped you to think about the other types of causes that could have led to revolution. So what I'm going to ask you guys to do now is I'm going to ask you guys to make a judgment. And that judgment is to what do you think the most important cause was, based on the evidence in front of you, based on what you've heard, based on your own kind of ideas there. And that is going to be the choice. It's going to be made. You're going to be making that choice via a poll, which we're just about to launch right now. I think, and so that should be available to you. So you guys can now vote in that poll to see which cause you think is the most important. And Etienne, Amy, if you want to vote, you also have a chance to make that judgment too. Yeah. Oh yeah, we're going to give you a minute for that. Seeing these votes come in. 10 seconds. Okay, lovely. So end the poll. Lovely. Okay, let's have a look. And can we see the results on the screen? Yeah, lovely. Brilliant. Excellent. Okay, so let's have a quick look. So, lots of you got Etienne, Amy. You obviously convinced them quite a lot with your kind of discussion. There's a lot of focus on economic crisis and poverty and inequality there. So lots of you seem to think it's about the economy, and definitely lots of people share your view on that too. Loads of historians also agree that it's the economy that's the real issue. What I think is interesting is how you guys are sort of split evenly a little bit on that, actually, though. With some of you were talking about kind of like the issue of poverty, so absolute kind of economic misery being the main thing, but and though a small majority of you were saying it's not so much the poverty itself, it's the inequality. It's the fact that this poverty is experienced on an unequal basis by people in France, and that's what's going to potentially drive them to revolt. And it's nice to see a couple of people are sticking to, like, they're saying no, it's about Marie Antoinette, it's about the Court of Versailles, or it's about the harsh absolute rule of the French monarchy. And definitely, I think in a lesson we'd probably have like a wider range of different views on this, because we haven't got a chance to go into a lot of depth about all the different kind of causes of revolution in 1789. But I certainly think that the views that you guys have expressed here would be pretty widely shared amongst students in the classes that I've taught here, about kind of poverty and inequality being a real factor. And it's an issue that we look at, and we do look at across the board in the various different courses, these kind of economic conditions and how they affect change. Brilliant. Okay. So I'll just close out of that. Okay, lovely. Okay, so just briefly, I'm just going to just take the next couple minutes to kind of wrap up this kind of key mock sort of like sample lesson. So that was just a bit of a taster to give you guys an idea about the kinds of reasoning and the kinds of materials that you'd work with. So the materials that were sent home to you are all materials that come from the work packs that we use in the French Revolution course. So that would be the kind of source that we look at. The source that Etienne and Amy talked through is a source that we spend a lot of time discussing in lessons. So these are the kinds of materials you'd look at. And the kinds of reasoning, the kind of discussion that you observed between Etienne and Amy, and the kinds of interjections I was making, is exactly the sort of discussion that you guys would be having in a history classroom. Both about primary sources, like the one you just saw, but also about historical interpretations. You'd be looking at and talking about whether you agree with them and things like that. Likewise, the kinds of judgment that you just made in that poll is exactly the kind of judgment that you would be asked to be making in a lesson discussion, in a sort of classroom debate, in that kind of context there. So that hopefully gives you an idea about the sorts of things you're going to be engaging with, not just on the French Revolution course, but obviously on all the other courses, the Tudors, the British Empire, the Cold War, etc. Onwards. Okay, so before we start, I turn my attention to your questions. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions of our students here as well, just to get their views on various things that might be on your minds, so you have a bit of an insight into the sort of the student perspective on things. So I'm going to start off with Etienne and Amy, and I'm going to start off Etienne first. Can you just tell the students, firstly, which part of the course you chose, early modern or modern, and why you made that decision?
So I study early modern history, which is the Tudors, French Rev, Civil Rights coursework one. And I was actually really split between which one to take, because I wanted to study Cold War, but I also wanted to study French Revolution, so I didn't know which one to go for. But ultimately, I went for early modern because I'd never studied French Revolution or anything to do with that period of time, and I really just wanted to throw myself in and try something new. And I found that I take politics as well, and I found that the early modern course goes like so nicely with the politics course, and they've been great to study together. So that's why I chose early modern in the end.
Yeah, that's been. I think it's really nice to take this opportunity to study new things and go into kind of like, unfamiliar ground. I think both the courses offer that, in terms of the Empire and the French Rev units. But yeah, but yeah, and your point about the links to politics, yeah, again, that's a really important factor there. Lovely, Amy. Same question to you.
Yeah, I was really stuck as well, actually. I didn't quite know which one I wanted to choose. But I think when I was deciding, I went through and actually I was looked back at what I studied at GCSE, and I was really interested. We did the Russian Revolution at GCSE, and the Cold War for me was kind of like a continuation of that, like the next period in time. And then I'd never done anything to do with British Empire, but actually kind of thinking about it, that it was kind of something that we as a country kind of hide away. We don't know very much about because we're quite ashamed of it as a country. And I didn't feel like I knew that much about the empire and about, like, our history as a country. So that was something I was really interested to kind of, and then I looked at like kind of Netflix shows and documentaries that I'd watched in my free time to actually be like, what was I interested in watching, like, just for me. And that really helped me to make up my mind.
That's really good. Yeah, I mean, doing your research is so important, and I really like the point you're making here. Obviously, I mean, it's probably very hard for you guys, those of you who are interested in history, to avoid mention the British Empire at the moment. It's very, very, politically kind of like a live issue, and so yeah, it's a really good opportunity if you're interested in it to actually find out a bit more about what's actually going on there. Lovely. Okay, the other question I'm going to ask both of you is about the coursework there as well. So again, starting with Etienne, how did you find the coursework process?
I mean, I've loved doing the coursework. I think it's a lot of fun, whichever one you take, because it kind of becomes a research project on a certain period of history. And for me, with the civil rights, I think it's just super interesting because you'll probably have done some period of like maybe late 1950s civil rights, but you go back just a little bit further to like the late 1800s, which for me has been the most interesting part. And I ended up picking my coursework question based on that. And I think you do a section at the end of the coursework where you pick 2 interpretations, and you can research them and find them yourself if you want to. And you essentially debate them against each other, which is really interesting because my favorite part of this whole course is the debate and putting interpretations against each other and kind of revisiting parts of history. So I think that bit at the end of your coursework, whichever course you do, is super interesting.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much, Etienne. And Amy, same question to you.
Yeah, I actually really enjoyed the coursework, which is a bit odd for me because I hadn't really ever really enjoyed doing coursework before.
Won you over.
Yeah, and actually when I signed up to do the course, I wanted to do the Civil War coursework because I thought I'd enjoy that more, but I ended up picking modern because I prefer the modern history. But then actually doing the different coursework in the end and doing the Tudors, I found it really, really interesting. And actually, like, doing all the research for it, you got to watch loads of documentaries and you got to read loads of really interesting articles and like compile everything together. And then actually writing it, I found really, actually quite not easy, but it was broken down into stages really well, and you did all the different sections, a good pace, and I found it quite, easy to get through, and it was like a very manageable workload in the end, actually.
Yeah, what I'm getting from both of you about that, and I think this is something that's really important, is the sense of accomplishment at the end of it. You guys have both completed a really detailed, in-depth research project on a question that's quite, important. And I think, that's one of the real benefits of the coursework. It does give you that a bit more freedom to really pursue your interests and your research there. Lovely. Okay, final question for the both of you. So just very quickly, your highlight of studying history at A-level at the college. Start again with Etienne.
I feel like this sounds like I'm a super boring history person, but definitely the mid-Tudor crisis, Edward and Mary, because it's what I was saying before, is you kind of do a revisiting of history and challenge what you might think you know about that period of time.
There is nothing wrong with liking the mid-Tudor crisis, Etienne, nothing at all. Okay, Amy, what do you reckon?
I think one of my favourite parts was obviously the coursework, actually. That surprised me being something actually that really stood out that I enjoyed. And then in the Cold War, the kind of more recent stuff in the Cold War is almost shocking because it didn't happen very long ago, and you can kind of draw parallels with stuff that's still happening at the moment and stuff that's a kind of not direct knock-on effect of things that happened 30 years ago that my parents are like, oh, I lived through that, It's really interesting to study.
I think the Cold War course ending in the 1990s does alarm quite a lot of people. Absolutely. Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much, both of you. I'm just going to ask you to hang on for a second, because I might fire some other questions at you as and when they come in. But I'm now going to have a look at some questions that you guys have submitted that I'm just going to kind of talk through. So in terms of the question as to when you make a choice about which of the two routes that you do, so you can actually put this choice off till quite late. So normally what happens is you will register your interest in studying history, and you'll have your interview, and you will express a provisional sort of request for one of the courses or the other, but that is very much provisional, like all your choices are at this kind of interview stage at this point. What then happens is you will then come in at in August for the another interview where you're going to be confirming your course choices. Now, most people make their choice of either modern or early modern then. Crucial thing is you're having that final interview after you've had your GCSE results, so you know what you're working with there. And you'll have obviously had a chance to think through things in a little bit more detail. However, it's even possible, even after that, though it doesn't happen in most cases. Most people are pretty much happy to stick with their choices made in August. It's even possible to switch over right at the start of doing the courses. So within the first 2 weeks of your term, if you really, really want to, you can switch courses to a certain extent, obviously dependent upon numbers on the course and signing up. And we do occasionally have a couple of people every year who start off on the modern course and then go into the early modern. We don't, or vice versa. We don't recommend doing this really, because obviously, we start right from the word go. So we obviously want, we want to get you going with the material you're covering, but you definitely don't have to make a choice until August. And you can, if you feel you've made a mistake after that, still have a chance to switch at that point. Okay. So the next question, the video mentioned an extra history club. Right, yes, so this is History Extra. Etienne will be able to tell you a bit about that as well. Actually, I'm going to start with you, Etienne. What is History Extra? What goes on there?
So History Extra, or C Club 7, as we called it, is essentially like kind of a history society. Like, it's a discussion group that we do once a week, and it's not like you have to sign up and come every week. Like, if it's a topic you're interested in, you can come along and just kind of have a discussion about it. So generally either Claire or one of us will like put forward an article, so we'll read through that and then just essentially have a historical, political, current affairs chat about the article, and it's quite casual, but it's a great way to expand your thinking maybe outside of what's specifically on the courses. So we've done some pretty wacky stuff that's not covered on the courses, and then we've done some stuff that's more streamlined to the courses. So it's just a way to engage with history outside of your lessons.
Yeah, brilliantly summed up there at the end. Yeah, so it is. It's a really quite nice, relaxed, in just an opportunity to discuss your historical interests. And as Etienne said, it is often like driven a lot by the students involved. I am always happy to take suggestions for articles and things like that, and things that we discuss. And we just have a quick chat over lunch or online at the moment, unfortunately, in some cases, and just a chance to think about some of the questions that are thrown up. And we do often go off onto quite significant tangents on some of these issues as well. Yeah, lovely, excellent. Are there any other? Oh, so we've got some more questions coming through. Brilliant. Okay, so over the 100-year period you study, how much detail do you go into? Well, that depends quite a bit on the what part of the course you're studying. So as I sort of mentioned at the start of my presentation, there is the breadth study, which is over quite a long period of time, and the depth study, which is kind of much more in-depth. So in general, you'll be going into more depth in the depth study than you will in that 100-year breadth study course. That being said, there's still a relatively significant amount of detail. Like, so for example, I'll try and give a concrete kind of idea about it. So say, for example, you're doing the modern course, let's say. You would probably spend like a whole lesson in the depth study unit on the Cold War, like going in lots of detail about the causes of the Korean War, say. Whereas in the breadth study unit on the British Empire, you might have a whole lesson on the causes and the course and consequences of, say, the Second Boer War. So there is a difference in terms of the sort of the level of detail you're going into. It still is, I think, in both cases, a little bit of an elevation from the level of detail you're going to be doing at GCSE, if that's kind of the baseline there. So you are expected to go into a reasonable amount of detail for each part of the course. It's just a little bit less, perhaps, on the breadth study unit. Okay, so the next question, right, are there two different teachers, or do all teachers teach both routes? Right, yeah, so yeah, you will have two history teachers if you do the course, and you will have a teacher for the Tudors course and a teacher for the French Revolution course, if, say, for example, you're doing the early modern route, and the same thing for the two units in the modern route. Now, we all as a department teach across the courses. So I currently, this year, I'm teaching the French Revolution, I'm teaching the British Empire, and I'm teaching the Cold War units. Last year, I didn't teach Cold War, I taught the Tudors. So all of the teachers can help you with work on all different parts of the course, because we teach across the whole of it. However, you will have a devoted French Revolution teacher and Tudors teacher, or British Empire teacher and Cold War teacher. You will go for your French Revolution lessons to see them in their classroom, and then go to another classroom for your Tudors lessons, and see a separate teacher there. And I think got another one coming in. Three more. Oh, wow, quite a lot of questions coming through. Brilliant. Excellent. Okay. So would it be a good idea to study the Cold War again if you've already studied it at GCSE, or would it be too repetitive? Okay, so just to check in with you guys, neither of you did the Cold War at GCSE, did you? Oh, you did at the end, but you chose a different A level. So yeah, okay. Right, so yeah, so I was just going to check and see if there was any personal experience of that. I think the key thing I say to people who are choosing the modern course and who have done Cold War at GCSE is you will be studying some of the same things, but in a lot more detail and depth than you will have done at GCSE, but also often from a slightly different angle. So I'll give an example of that. When we're looking, say, for example, at the Vietnam War in the Cold War course, firstly, we spend a lot of time on it, but also we're spending probably a lot more time than you might have done at GCSE, thinking about the colonial background of Vietnam, and the role of the French Empire there, its collapse, and then why the Americans then feel they've got to kind of intervene in that process. So there are slightly different angles onto thinking about things, and a lot more depth and detail. There also will be other stuff that you won't have covered in your Cold War GCSE that you will be covering at the A level. So, for example, there's a lot more attention paid to Central America and events there, and events in Africa, for example, as well. So, yeah, I think it's very much a personal judgment. If you really, really love the Cold War and you want to go into a lot more depth on it, then go for it and cover it again. If you are kind of like, feeling, oh, I'm not sure I want to do another couple of years of the Cold War, probably best to think about perhaps doing the early modern unit instead there. Okay, do you need history GCSE to study A-level history? No, you do not. No. So our entry requirements are, we require a 5 in English language at GCSE because of the level of reading and writing that you need to do for the A-level course, and that's really kind of like, if you're not getting that grade, then we feel you're going to struggle a bit with the level of the workload there. If you have got a history GCSE, we ask to see a 5 in that, just to show that you've kind of found that you've been successful in the course and that you've been able to kind of work within it. But we don't require that history GCSE. That is because we have had students in the past who haven't done the history GCSE, have seen the light at A level, and have realised that actually, you know what, I want to do history anyway. And those students are successful, they enjoy the course, it's not therefore a requirement for us. So short answer, no, you don't need that history GCSE, you can join us without one. And then finally, what subjects go well with A-level history? Okay, so Etienne, you've already mentioned politics as a really good partner topic. Amy, I just wanted to quickly ask you, are there any other subjects that you do that you feel pair well with history? at A level?
Well, I did chemistry, biology, and history, which kind of sounds a bit abstract, but actually I've applied to veterinary medicine this year. And I found actually that it's really helped having history to go on to do a scientific subject. Actually, they've looked at that really well, that you've got a kind of almost broader kind of education rather than just doing another science subject. And it's shown I've got a kind of different skill set.
Yeah.
And I did Latin last year, actually, a level 1 Latin course with classics department, which I really, really enjoyed.
Yeah.
And I thought that worked well together as well.
Yeah, no, that's thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, that's one of our classic things. I think it's a certificate, a level 1 qualification that you can do alongside all your other courses. It's really cracking if you're interested. Brilliant. Yeah, excellent. I think Amy, what you've done there is actually you've given a really good example of the fact that history can also fit well for primarily science-based kind of subject range, which is great. Okay, Etienne, I'm going to go back to you then. I'm going to ask, what was it about in a bit more detail about politics and history that made them that worked so well together?
Well, I mean, I guess it's quite interesting for me because I wasn't going to take history or politics at this stage, and it's now what I want to do for my degree. But I think I found, particularly in the French Revolution course, you see the emergence of like political factions, and it's almost like a bubble of like different political systems. It's like an experiment in different political systems. And there are just like kind of a few like fun novelty things, like where the whole like sitting on different sides of the bench comes from and stuff like that, which when you're studying politics alongside it is quite cool. And when the actual like timings of when you study things line up with the two courses for me. So when I was studying French Revolution, that's when we started studying UK Parliament. And then when I was studying America in politics was when we were doing the civil rights coursework. So you get really nice context for both sides of them. So the historical context for politics and then the political theory behind what's happening in history is kind of what's worked well together for me.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, and I definitely agree. As someone who also did history and politics at A level myself, it really does fit very nicely together. Yeah, I mean, in terms of more general other subjects which go well with it. So really a whole range of things work. Certainly if you're doing anything like politics, sociology, economics, there's lots of kind of common themes and also some common kind of skills that you're being asked to deploy in like things like evidence analysis and that kind of stuff. Likewise, if you're doing things like English, philosophy, classics, again, some common ideas that work really nicely with each other, similar kind of techniques and skills in writing essay responses. But it also can be a nice paired with more creative subjects or scientific subjects as well, because then it shows to universities, as Amy was sort of saying, that you've got a nice real range of skills and abilities there, and that you're not like, you're not just a sciencey person, you're a sciencey plus humanities person, or you're not just an art person, you can do essay writing as well. Lovely. Have we got time for final three questions? Lovely. Do that. Okay. How many students in a typical class? Yeah, so in terms of the average numbers, you're normally looking about sort of like 16, 17, yeah, between sort of 16 and 18 students per class. Sometimes you have a slightly more than that. Don't really, you're not going to go above kind of like 20 really. Sometimes you have slightly fewer than that. Don't normally go below 14 in a class there. So that's sort of your kind of standard number there, which is quite nice, I think, because there's enough people to have a debate with, but obviously you're not just all kind of rammed in the classroom there. So that's sort of the standard numbers there. Okay. Right, I'm going to address you guys with this question. Homework. So what kinds of homework do you get given and how long do you tend to spend on it? I'm going to ask Amy that question.
I wouldn't say we probably get set as much homework to do outside of the classroom as we do work in the classroom, but we do have a lot of frees to do that in. So like I have a Tuesday and a Friday that I'm not in college at all, so you have plenty of time to do the work. But we get set some really interesting homework, actually. There's a lot of extract analysis and there's a lot of kind of videos. We have a platform called eStream, so you like to watch a lot of kind of documentaries or clips from documentaries to kind of help your learning, we have a platform called History Today, which has like loads and loads of different articles written by really good historians that we tend to use as well to get some like contextual knowledge. And then this year we've just started, we've got a huge pack of different articles for both of our topics that we've started going into and annotating as kind of like part of our wider knowledge and kind of back up our learning. So lots of different things.
Yes, and common feature there, lots of reading and responding to that reading there. Yeah, definitely. Yes. Yeah, again, really nicely explained. Thank you very much, Amy, there. So yeah, a whole range of different activities, research, responses to articles, to documentaries, etc. What I normally do, and I think this is true across the department really, is often the homework that you do will often feed into your next lesson. So there are lots of lessons will often start with a discussion of something that you've read or watched or written for your kind of homework, and so therefore it will form a natural part of the course, not just kind of an extra thing that you do outside, but it will kind of feed into the work that you're doing in lessons. Okay, is it the same teachers helping with the coursework? Yeah, so your coursework is managed by both of your teachers. So say for example, you start work on your coursework in the summer term, then both your French Revolution and tutors or your British Empire and Cold War teacher will sort of stop teaching their normal units and will then start teaching you the coursework unit and the coursework content. And then we will at various points we've collapsed the timetable, so you're working on coursework all the time, and then sometimes we do bits where you're working on coursework alongside the main courses, so you'll have one lesson a week, two lessons a week out of your 4 on coursework, and the other 2 will be on the other units you're doing. So a lot of that we've had to rearrange it a bit this year because of the current circumstances, but ordinarily that's what happens. Both of your teachers will help you with your coursework. There, lovely. Okay, that's it. Brilliant. Okay, excellent. Well, okay. Firstly, a really big thank you to Etienne and Amy. It was so good to hear you guys talk about the source and to answer my questions. I'm sure that it's been absolutely invaluable for the students, the applicants listening in, to hear your perspective, not just me kind of going on and on and on about stuff. So wonderful. Thank you very much, guys. And thank you very much to all of you for kind of logging in and listening. I hope this has given you a bit of an idea about how the course works. I hope this has fired up a bit of enthusiasm. And I really look forward to seeing all of you when we start our courses in September. Lovely. Excellent. Well, thank you very much.